Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Naruto Awakened Explosion Bloodline. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Village hidden in the leaves. The distraught 8-year-old Naruto headed back towards his apartment while trying to beat the approaching night. It had been a bad day for the whiskered blonde, though that was close to every day unfortunately. He'd spent most of the day at the park, trying to find someone who'd at least talk to him. But most of the kids either flat out ignored him or hurled out insults to him. The real sad part, most of those who yelled at him were the adults. It was a few months until he'd be enrolled into the ninja academy. Yet with how things were going for him, Naruto couldn't help but wonder if he'd be treated any differently than how he was now. If only something could happen that'd change his life for the better. Little did Naruto know that tiny changes in one's destiny can bring monumental changes. In one world, the one we all know, Naruto went home for the evening with no problems whatsoever. In this one though, things took a different turn. Naruto decided to head down an alleyway to take a shortcut home. Unknown to the blonde, this particular alleyway went behind a bar, where a certain nasty drunk had just been thrown out of. Also unknown to the boy was the Ambu guards who watched over him every hour of the day to make sure no one said or do anything to the Jinchuriki that they'd regret. We're switching shifts at the moment, and for approximately 5 minutes no one was watching over him. Naruto went down the alleyway, ignoring the rats and occasional stray dog that littered the area as he kept his head down. So caught up in his gloom, Naruto didn't see the large, smelly man in the middle of the path until he lightly brushed up against him. The drunk, who shall remain nameless, was about to yell at whoever it was that ran into him. That was, until he saw that it was the demon holder, the one who held the same fox that destroyed his home and business that day 8 years ago. Now if the man was sober, he'd simply yell at the kid and stalk off before his anger made him do something that was sure to get him arrested or worse. But in his inebriated state, the drunk didn't think about nor care for the consequences for his actions and sent a vicious kick at Naruto's unprotected ribs. The blonde child gave a startled yelp in surprise, pain, and fear. He landed in a nearby puddle with a splash, and he looked up at his attacker with wide, scared eyes. While most adults had made it clear they didn't want anything to do with him, and some seemed to downright hate him, no one had ever gone as far as to physically attack him before. Naruto found the experience to be especially terrifying. "Stupid demon brat," the drunk slurred as he stalked towards the blonde and raised his leg for another kick. "The Hokage should have killed you the second you were born." With that, the kick connected with Naruto's chin and he saw stars as a razor-sharp pain made itself known. The whiskered child tasted BLD as his lips split. Whimpering in pain, not even able to cry out due to the pain in his face and bruised ribs, Naruto curled up into a ball in the dirty puddle water to try and make a smaller target of himself. Instead of backing off, the drunk seemed to get angrier at, in his mind, the demon's attempt at playing innocent and proceeded to ruthlessly kick the child in any place he could reach. Naruto gasped in pain and fear as the assault continued, screwing his eyes shut in a feeble attempt to block out the pain. Unknown to either people, Naruto started to subconsciously pull on his chakra in his panic state. Being his first time calling on his chakra, it was still raw and untapped. This, along with the fear-induced adrenaline coursing through his veins, caused him to pull his chakra from deep inside, tapping into genes that had previously been dormant and would have stayed that way if not for this one incident. The chakra started to build up in his hands, and Naruto, not knowing what the feeling was, acted on instinct. When the drunk went in for another kick, Naruto reached his hand out and grabbed onto the man's pant leg. The built-up chakra was released and the results were explosive. Boom. Scene break. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, stood outside of a hospital room door with a gloomy expression on his face. Yesterday evening, a large explosion had rocked the back alleyways of the Hidden Leaf. When the Ambu arrived on the scene, there were 2 figures taken from the area. One was a battered and burnt man who seemed to receive the full brunt of the explosion. Multiple burns and breaks littered the man's body, and it was unlikely he'd be able to use the one leg again. It was the other person that concerned the aged Hokage, however. Naruto Uzumaki, the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed demon fox, was found at the scene unconscious but surprisingly all right besides a few scrapes and bruises. When he asked the boy's Ambu guards, they explained that they were currently switching shifts for the night and that had created a blind spot for a few minutes, so they were unable to see or prevent what happened. That was a serious mistake that Hiruzen planned on correcting, but first he had to deal with more pressing matters such as finding out exactly what happened. The third was brought out of his musings as a mednin came up to him. The medic gave the aged leader their report on the victims. The man was found with 2nd and 3rd degree burns covering nearly half of his body. It was clear from the extent of his injuries that he was at the focal point of the explosion. BLD test shows that his BLD alcohol levels were way past the recommended levels, as was confirmed by the nearby bar owner who reported to had earlier thrown the man out for drunken disorderly conduct. The medic explained. Sarutobi nodded his head in both understanding and to urge the medic to move on. The medic cleared his throat as he looked at the other chart he had. The boy was found to have bruising on his ribs and had a nasty cut on his chin, but both healed within the hour. The two looked at each other, both having an inkling as to what caused Naruto's miraculous recovery. The medic continued, no other significant injuries were found. However, BLD tests on the boy have indicated. At this the medic paused, which worried the Hokage. Indicated what? Hiruzen asked in all seriousness. The medic took a deep breath and looked the professor straight in the eye. The BLD tests show the unleashing of a previously recessive BLD line awakening, most likely brought on by the stress of whatever happened before the explosion. But that's not all, Lord Hokage, the medic said, catching the Hokage's attention since he was caught off guard from the news. As far as he knew, neither of Naruto's parents had BLD lines. However, it wasn't unheard of for them to skip several generations and be unlocked under extreme situations. The Mednin continued in a serious tone. We've compared the data of the BLD line to all known to us and we've only found one match. One we've obtained through the fighting of the Third Shinobi War. It would appear Naruto unlocked the explosion-release BLD line. If Hiruzen was stunned before, he was shocked speechless now. Of all the BLD lines Naruto had to inherit, why did it have to be one of the most famous BLD lines of the Hidden Stone? The Explosion Corps, a special group of stone ninja who all have a version of the explosion-release BLD line, were well known from their exploits and leaving trails of destruction in their wake both in and out of wars. This would complicate things immensely. While being a Jinchuriki was in and of itself difficult to live with, having a BLD line famous from an enemy village was like pouring gasoline on a roaring flame. People would start to assume Naruto was a babe Minato took during his exploits in the Third War to use as a holder for the Nine Tails, or some other ridiculous notion to raise the already uneasy thoughts regarding the blonde. Not to mention what the Hidden Stone would do if they ever found out. Naruto's life was already at risk with them due to his parentage. Who knew what would happen if the stone ninjas found one of their BLD lines was carried by the son of their most hated foe? The third quickly grabbed his pipe from his robe and took a deep puff. The smoke helped calming his panicking mind. He'd need to gain control of this situation and fast. First, he needed a cover story. Maybe an exposed gas line went off in the alley while the man's body shielded Naruto from the blast. Yes, that'd work. It would explain Naruto's lack of serious injury, and the man was in no condition to contradict it, due to the explosion mixed in with his drunken state most likely hindering his memory. And if that didn't work, he could always persuade the man to cooperate, because the professor had an inkling on how the whole situation occurred, and if the man didn't want to spend life in jail he'd say whatever the Hokage told him to. The next thing to do was to comfort Naruto and let him know what happened. Hopefully, the old man could calm the boy and tell him in a way that would not upset him further, but also show him the severity of the situation. That led to the next problem, how to get Naruto to control his new BLD line. Whenever a BLD line is awakened, it's always necessary for the wielder to learn how to use it to avoid hurting themselves and others. It wouldn't work to have Naruto simply ignore the BLD line, because that could lead to severe physical and mental problems such as activating his abilities against his will. What Hiruzen needed was a teacher for Naruto, but who? Asking the Hidden Stone was out, since they were still sore about the last war, and finding users of the explosion release was rare outside of the Stone Village. The best bet was to find a missing nin who had the BLD line and convincing them to join the village. But as far as he knew, none of the known missing nins had the BLD line. So what was he to do? This was a question that pestered Hiruzen through the rest of the day and into the night. When he returned to the office the next day, hoping to hear about improvements on Naruto's condition and hoping the hospital staff kept their vow of silence on the matter, the old Hokage sat at his desk nursing a building headache. There was then the fluttering of feathers as the messenger hawk arrived to deliver the daily mail. The third looked at the pile of foreign mail and noticed right on top was the latest edition of the bingo book. Doubting his luck, Hiruzen flipped through the pages of the Elemental Nations Most Wanted until he reached the Stone Village section. Page after page went by until, next to the last page, the Hokage struck gold. Praising everything that was holy, Hiruzen couldn't help but stare at the latest entry from the Hidden Stone Village that contained a picture of a blonde boy not much older than Naruto. Name, Deidara. Age, 11. Previous affiliation, Hidden Stone Village. Rank, S. Description, recruited into the Explosion Corps at a young age, Deidara possesses a powerful explosion-release BLD line and was taught by the third Tsuchikage himself. Has stolen a village Kenjutsu and caused severe property damage in his defection. Has been known to make clay into living bombs. Threat level, approach with extreme caution. While the third was thrilled by this discovery, a part of him felt uneasy about this. For one, while the boy was now considered a missing nin, that didn't mean he'd willingly join an enemy village. Criminal or no, he could still be a patriot. Another thing was that the boy was taught by Unoki himself, that made it especially dangerous because any native to the Stone Village would be able to recognize Deidara, and another village harboring him could be seen as an act of war. Finally, there was no telling what effect the boy would have on Naruto. It must be done, Hiruzen thought resolutely, for Naruto's sake as well as for the sake of the village. The only question that remains is how to track him. Yo, a lazy voice sounded behind the old man, making the aged Kage smile as he turned to face the new arrival. Kakashi Haddock reporting that Team 7 has failed the second Genin exam once more, the one-eyed Jonin said as he stared at his leader listlessly. Kakashi, I'm glad you're here. I've got a special assignment for you, the third started as he began the younger man's debriefing. Scene skip. Faye, lousy art hating sacks of crap. I'll show them all that true art is an explosion, HM. and then we'll see what's what. A young man with long blonde hair and piercing blue eyes mused as he sat on the stairway of an abandoned temple inside the land of grass's border. He idly tossed a lump of clay up and down in his hand before a mouth in his palm suddenly opened up and chomped on it before spitting out a perfect clay spider. Deidara smirked. While implanting the kenjutsu that gave him the additional mouths on his palms and on his chest had hurt, it had been worth the pain. Now he could complete art in a single moment anytime he wished by molding his chakra into clay and making more sculptures that would perform his art. While it had been a couple weeks since he left the hidden stone, Deidara was easily able to avoid his pursuers. After all, traveling by clay bird was much faster than walking. The mad bomber was about to get up and leave when he heard a cough right behind him. Spinning around, the young man saw a tall man leaning in the door of the temple, idly leaning back. The man had long silver hair and a mask covering the bottom half of his face, but what caught the blonde bomber's attention was the forehead protector with a leaf design tilted over his left eye. Deidara sneered, "So the Leaf's dogs have caught on to me, HM. Okay then, you can be the first to experience my art." Katsu. With a yell, Deidara held his hand into a symbol and suddenly, the clay insects that were surrounding the unsuspecting leaf ninja detonated, sending a cloud of smoke into the air. The former stone ninja laughed until he felt a presence behind him. "Now that wasn't very nice," the man said in an almost bored tone, "and here I was just wanting to talk." The bomber seethed, thinking this guy wasn't taking him seriously. Deidara got ready to unleash another bomb on the enemy shinobi when he suddenly felt a sharp jab on the back of his neck, causing everything to go black. When he woke up, Deidara found his arms tied tightly behind his back and his weapons pouches that held his clay, kunai, and shuriken were missing. Looking around, the missing nin spot the leaf shinobi sitting on a nearby log in a relaxed pose, reading a book of all things. The masked man looked up with his one eye at the restrained boy and said casually, "Oh good, you're up. Ready to talk now." Deidara spat out a string of profanities before slumping over to catch his breath. Once he regained his bearings, the bomber looked back up at the silver-haired man with an angry, but noticeably calmer expression on his face. "How'd you get the drop on me so easily?" he asked with venom in his voice. "Simple," the man replied. "While you may be a prodigy and you may have a powerful new jutsu, you let your arrogance blind you. You thought you were unbeatable with your new power, and you completely disregarded the basics of being a ninja, which allowed me to subdue you with a simple replacement jutsu followed by a distraction with a shadow clone." Deidara started for a moment before slumping in defeat. He'd allowed himself to be taken by surprise by basics. If the old goat could see him now, Deidara would never hear the end of it. "So what now?" the bomber asked tiredly, his tone defeated. "Are you going to take me back to the hidden stone? Or are you just going to kill me for your other leaf buddies?" Kakashi didn't immediately reply as he took out a kunai and walked over to the tied-up boy. Closing his eyes, Deidara prepared for his end when suddenly he felt his bonds being cut off. Looking up at the silver-haired Jonin in surprise, Kakashi simply shrugged as he walked back over to his seat. "Like I said, I'm only here to talk," he said as he sat back down. Deidara rubbed his wrists while looking at the man warily before sighing and saying, "All right, talk." The blond boy could have sworn he saw the man smile, even though his mouth was covered. The man began to talk, and the more he heard, the greater Deidara's interest grew. Once the man, who Deidara learned was none other than the Kakashi headache, finished, the mad bomber was nearly alight with glee. "So let me get this straight, HM," he began while looking at Kakashi intently for any sign of deceit. "I help you train this snot-nosed kid in mastering his newly awakened explosion-release bloodline, and in turn you'll give me complete protection from the hidden stone, HM. That's about the gist of it." "Yeah," Kakashi said with another one of his queer eye smiles. "Plus you get clan benefits as the two of you would be the only ones in the village with your bloodline, such as getting your own compound and having a say on village issues. Of course, if you don't want to, you're free to go." Deidara thought about it for all of half a second. Complete protection from the hidden stone and being able to teach another about the beauty of art. Plus, if the old goat ever found out he'd joined the Stone Village's most hated enemy, it'd probably push the Tsuchikage into a heart attack. His choice was immediately clear. "Sign me up, HM." Deidara said with a smile so wide, it almost looked like his extra mouths were smiling too. "Things were definitely looking interesting, HM. Note, I do not actually support the Naruto was beaten as a child theory. For one, it's unrealistic that the third would allow that, and two, while Naruto is the source of scorn, people still have hearts, and I doubt large mobs would stoop to beating a 4-year-old close to death repeatedly. I do sometimes read stories that have that just to read the plot surrounding that, but I'm not a supporter of the idea myself. That's why I hope I did Naruto's beating here in a believable way, where the attacker was drunk and the Anbu guards were switching shifts." Now, as to why Kakashi defeated Deidara, the bomber always struck me as kind of PPY, and I bet his pride was at an all-time high as soon as he defected. Also, he believed that with his new power, and that he was considered a prodigy back in stone, made him invincible. Think of it like when Kakashi first developed the Chidori and was nearly killed because he got PPY. I hope I made the fight believable for readers. Also, I'm not sure exactly when Deidara defected, but for the sake of the story it was when Naruto was about to enter the academy, and since Deidara is 3 years older than Naruto, that'd make him 11 at the time. Again people, this is a challenge. Did I happen to mention this as a challenge? So if you're interested, please contact me via review or PM. Until then, enjoy this and my other works. Village hidden in the leaves. A distraught 8-year-old Naruto headed back towards his apartment while trying to beat the approaching night. It had been a bad day for the whiskered blonde, though that was close to every day unfortunately. He'd spent most of the day at the park, trying to find someone who'd at least talk to him. But most of the kids either flat out ignored him or hurled out insults to him. The real sad part, most of those who yelled at him were the adults. It was a few months until he'd be enrolled into the ninja academy, yet with how things were going for him, Naruto couldn't help but wonder if he'd be treated any differently than how he was now. If only something could happen that'd change his life for the better. Little did Naruto know that tiny changes in one's destiny can bring monumental changes. In one world, the one we all know, Naruto went home for the evening with no problems whatsoever. In this one though, things took a different turn. Naruto decided to head down an alleyway to take a shortcut home. Unknown to the blonde, this particular alleyway went behind a bar, where a certain nasty drunk had just been thrown out of. Also unknown to the boy was the Ambu guards who watched over him every hour of the day to make sure no one said or do anything to the Jinchuriki that they'd regret. We're switching shifts at the moment, and for approximately 5 minutes no one was watching over him. Naruto went down the alleyway, ignoring the rats and occasional stray dog that littered the area as he kept his head down. So caught up in his gloom, Naruto didn't see the large, smelly man in the middle of the path until he lightly brushed up against him. The drunk, who shall remain nameless, was about to yell at whoever it was that ran into him. That was, until he saw that it was the demon holder, the one who held the same fox that destroyed his home and business that day 8 years ago. Now if the man was sober, he'd simply yell at the kid and stalk off before his anger made him do something that was sure to get him arrested or worse. But in his inebriated state, the drunk didn't think about nor care for the consequences for his actions and sent a vicious kick at Naruto's unprotected ribs. The blonde child gave a startled yelp in surprise, pain, and fear. He landed in a nearby puddle with a splash, and he looked up at his attacker with wide, scared eyes. While most adults had made it clear they didn't want anything to do with him, and some seemed to downright hate him, no one had ever gone as far as to physically attack him before. Naruto found the experience to be especially terrifying. Stupid demon brat, the drunk slurred as he stalked towards the blonde and raised his leg for another kick. The Hokage should have killed you the second you were born. With that, the kick connected with Naruto's chin and he saw stars as a razor-sharp pain made itself known. The whiskered child tasted BLD as his lips split. Whimpering in pain, not even able to cry out due to the pain in his face and bruised ribs, Naruto curled up into a ball in the dirty puddle water to try and make a smaller target of himself. Instead of backing off, the drunk seemed to get angrier at, in his mind, the demon's attempt at playing innocent and proceeded to ruthlessly kick the child in any place he could reach. Naruto gasped in pain and fear as the assault continued, screwing his eyes shut in a feeble attempt to block out the pain. Unknown to either people, Naruto started to subconsciously pull on his chakra in his panicked state. Being his first time calling on his chakra, it was still raw and untapped. This, along with the fear-induced adrenaline coursing through his veins, caused him to pull his chakra from deep inside, tapping into genes that had previously been dormant and would have stayed that way if not for this one incident. The man pulled up his leg for another powerful kick, but instead of hitting ribs, the man's foot met water. Naruto's body distorted a bit as it went from a solid to a liquid and back, much to both of the alley's occupants' surprise. The man, thinking it was some sort of demon power and the boy was about to unleash hell upon him, turned and started to flee the alley but didn't get far as dark figures suddenly leapt down and subdued him. This was the last thing Naruto saw as the stress from the day, the fear of what was happening to him and exhaustion from unlocking his chakra for the first time all took their toll. The last thing the watery blonde saw before passing out was that his hands seemed to be losing their shape and forming puddles of pure water. Scene break. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, stood outside of a hospital room door with a gloomy expression on his face. Yesterday evening, one of the Ambu he had placed to guard Naruto came barging into his office with dire news. When he asked what was wrong, the boy's Ambu guards explained that they had been switching shifts for the night and that had created a blind spot for a few minutes, but when the guard finished shifting they saw a shocking sight. A drunk had been attacking their charge and, when they moved to stop him, it was to the surprise of all that the victim had suddenly turned part of his body into water, making his attacker's blows harmless. The Ambu had apprehended the man before he could flee the scene and was now in custody, but what was really worrying was what happened next. Naruto, losing consciousness, seemed to lose control over whatever was happening to his body and his entire form became liquid, leaving behind a set of clothes lying in a puddle. Thinking quickly, one of the members of the guard used a minor water jutsu to pick up the puddle that had once been a boy while another used a sealing scroll to place the water in. They'd taken a sealed water boy to Konoha's hospital in hopes that something could be done and that what happened could be explained. This brings us to the present as Hiruzen stared at a large test tube that contained what had been his grandson figure but was now clear water. The aged Hokage couldn't help but frown at what had been partially responsible for this event, the time it took to switch the guard. That was a serious mistake that Hiruzen planned on correcting, but first he had to deal with more pressing matters such as finding out exactly what happened. The third went over multiple ideas on what happened, but he was brought out of his musings as a med nin came up to him. The medic gave the aged leader their report on the liquidized boy. At first it was thought that the liquid was the remains of a water clone, but after extensive research we found traces of human DNA mixed in with large amounts of chakra in the water. The DNA matches that of one Naruto Uzumaki. There is more, Lord Hokage. At this the medic paused, which worried the Hokage. What is it? Hiruzen asked in all seriousness. The medic took a deep breath and looked the professor straight in the eye. The tests done on both the DNA and chakra show the unleashing of a previously recessive bloodline awakening, most likely brought on by the stress of the attack. But we cannot at this time identify the nature of the bloodline. Hiruzen Sarutobi, nicknamed the professor, already had a good idea on the exact nature of the bloodline. If his memory served him correctly, and he's sure it did despite his age, he'd only heard of one type of bloodline that changed the user's body into water. The bloodline was that of the Hazuki clan of the village hidden in the mist, called the hydrification technique. He'd personally fought and met several users of the clan during the wars, including the second Mizukage. The hydrification technique, while not one of the more flashy bloodlines out there, was nonetheless a powerful ability. In addition to allowing the user to turn their body into water, making them virtually both immune to physical damage and natural masters of water jutsu, it also allowed them to increase the strength of their limbs by focusing water into that specific area. The only downside was that the user had to constantly keep their bodies hydrated. The third quickly grabbed his pipe from his robe and took a deep puff, the smoke helped calming his racing mind. He knew that he needed to gain control of this situation and fast. The first thing he'd try to do was to comfort Naruto once he'd gained consciousness and let him know what happened. Hopefully, the old man could calm the boy and tell him in a way that would not upset him further, but also show him the severity of the situation. With any luck it'd allow Naruto to regain his physical form. That led to the next problem, how to get Naruto to control his new bloodline on a more regular basis. Whenever a bloodline is awakened, it's always necessary for the wielder to learn how to use it to avoid hurting themselves and others. It wouldn't work to have Naruto simply ignore the bloodline, because that could lead to severe physical and mental problems such as activating his abilities against his will. What Hiruzen needed was a teacher for Naruto, but who? Asking the Hidden Mist was unlikely since his sources had reported that they were at the brink of civil war, mostly due to Yagura's, the fourth Mizukage, increasingly erratic behavior. And finding users of the hydrification technique was rare outside of the Mist Village. The best bet was to find a missing nin who had the bloodline and convincing them to join the village. But as far as he knew, none of the known missing nins had the bloodline. So what was he to do? This was a question that pestered Hiruzen through the rest of the day and into the night. When he returned to the office the next day, hoping to hear about improvements on Naruto's condition and hoping both the Anbu and the hospital staff kept their vow of silence on the matter, the old Hokage sat at his desk nursing a building headache. There was then the fluttering of feathers as the messenger hawk arrived to deliver the daily mail. The third looked at the pile of foreign mail and noticed a report from one of his spies in the hidden mist among the pile. Deciding he'd see if there was any news that'd help him with the current situation, Hiruzen went over the report. The results weren't good. Apparently the Mizukage had decreed all bloodlines in the Land of Water's territories were now outlawed and those possessing bloodlines were either driven out or killed. This report helped the elderly Kage make a final decision. There is no helping it. I need to send an agent to the Hidden Mist and try to find a Hazuki that would be willing to come to the Leaf before they get wiped out. Offering protection and a place to live away from the BLDY mist should be enough of a motivator to gain their interest. It must be done, Hiruzen thought resolutely, for Naruto's sake as well as for the sake of the village. The only question that remains is how to track down the clan. Yo, a lazy voice sounded behind the old man, making the aged Kage smile as he turned to face the new arrival. Kakashi Haddock reporting that Team 7 has failed the second Genin exam once more, the one-eyed Jonin said as he stared at his leader listlessly. Kakashi, I'm glad you're here. I've got a special assignment for you, the third started as he began the younger man's debriefing. Scene skip. Hurry Suidesu. The hunters are coming. A teen around the age of 15 yelled to a child of 8. The boys appeared to be brothers as they had near-identical, shoulder-length silver hair, purple eyes, and sharp, shark-like teeth. I'm running as fast as I can, Mengetsu. The now-named Suidesu shouted back, hastily gulping down water from one of the water bottles that were hanging off of his belt. Suddenly, a kunai knife went whistling through the air and went right through the younger brother's head. However, instead of a burst of BLD and bone there was a splash of water as the boy gave a yelp of surprise, his head quickly reforming from water. Oh great, they found us. Thanks Slowpoke, Mengetsu said sarcastically while staring at the younger boy and at the same time keeping his guard up as several people wearing masks that have a red wave on them suddenly appeared in the clearing they were in. Suidesu gave his older brother a hand gesture that most 8-year-olds shouldn't know and bit back, hey, shut up. If you hadn't been sleeping in so much, we wouldn't be in this mess. Whatever, the second coming of the demon grumbled as he took off a large sword draped along his back. At least I'll give Hurrinkari a workout. Careful, one of the masked men shouted. Despite being children, they both are at the same level of the 7 swordsmen. The brothers gave identical sharp smirks as Suidesu brought out a tanto sheath at his back while the bandages fell off of Mengetsu's blade. "Don't worry," they said in unison, "it'll all be over soon." Time skip. The duo stood amongst a large pile of bodies, idly wiping their blades of any BLD. "That was pretty good, but you need to work on your technique a little more. It took you nearly a minute longer to kill your half than it should have," Mengetsu lectured as he rewrapped his blade. Suigetsu was just about to tear his older brother a new one when he suddenly felt a blade pressed against his neck. "Drop your weapon or the brat dies," one surviving hunter nin hissed as he tightened his grip on the katana underneath the boy's head. Judging by his wounds and the BLD on him that wasn't his, it showed the man had gotten wounded during the fight but used his dead comrades as camouflage until he found an opportunity to strike. The older brother was about to ask if the man was stupid, seeing as their BLD lines made direct attacks like that useless, until he noticed the slight spark coming off the blade of the man's katana at random intervals. Crap, a lightning user, he thought in a panic. That was the only chakra type that could cancel out and cause harm to a Hazuki even in their water state. Seeing no alternative, the swordsman slowly lowered his large sword to the ground and stood back up with his arms raised. Before their attacker could do anything else, however, there was a shout by an unknown voice. "Lightning blade," the voice said before suddenly, the hunter's body went rigid and a hand coated in electricity exploded through his chest, killing him instantly. When the man dropped, it showed a tall man standing in the hunter's place with a large cloak draped over him, hiding his features from view. The figure shook the BLD off his hand before looking at the two brothers, who had gotten close together the second the hunter was killed and took up a defensive position. The man made a come motion with his one hand and said in a hushed voice, "Other hunter nins are coming, we've got to move quickly or they'll be on us in minutes." With that, the figure turned and started to move through the fog. The swordsman duo looked at each other for a second before they crept after the man, keeping their guards up in the event this was a trap. After nearly a half hour of walking they reached a cave where the man went into. Making sure the entrance wasn't Melunzi trapped, the brothers went in after him. Halfway into the cave they came across the man at a makeshift campsite with a smokeless fire lighting up the cave. As the man sat down, Mengetsu stepped forward. "Look, not that we're not grateful or something, but what's this all about? Who are you and what do you want from us?" the elder brother asked while keeping his hand near the hilt of his sword. The man lowered the hood of his cloak to show a head of spiky silver hair and a masked face, with a headband that had a leaf symbol on it tilted over the man's left eye. The man seemed to smile at the brothers with his one eye and said in a relaxed tone, "And hello to you too, Mr. Mengetsu and Suigetsu Hazuki. My name is Kakashi Hadake, and in answer to your question, it's not so much what I want but what the Hidden Leaf Village wants. Please tell me, would you be interested in a change in scenery? All it'll cost you is some tutoring lessons." Village hidden in the leaves. A distraught 8-year-old Naruto headed back towards his apartment while trying to beat the approaching night. It had been a bad day for the whiskered blonde, though that was close to every day unfortunately. He'd spent most of the day at the park, trying to find someone who'd at least talk to him. But most of the kids either flat out ignored him or hurled out insults to him. The real sad part, most of those who yelled at him were the adults. It was a few months until he'd be enrolled into the ninja academy, yet with how things were going for him Naruto couldn't help but wonder if he'd be treated any differently than how he was now. If only something could happen that'd change his life for the better. Little did Naruto know that tiny changes in one's destiny can bring monumental changes. In one world, the one we all know, Naruto went home for the evening with no problems whatsoever. In this one though, things took a different turn. Naruto decided to head down an alleyway to take a shortcut home. Unknown to the blonde, this particular alleyway went behind a bar, where a certain nasty drunk had just been thrown out of. Also unknown to the boy was the Ambu guards who watched over him every hour of the day to make sure no one said or do anything to the Jinchuriki that they'd regret. We're switching shifts at the moment and for approximately 5 minutes no one was watching over him. Naruto went down the alleyway, ignoring the rats and occasional stray dog that littered the area as he kept his head down. So caught up in his gloom, Naruto didn't see the large, smelly man in the middle of the path until he lightly brushed up against him. The drunk, who shall remain nameless, was about to yell at whoever it was that ran into him. That was, until he saw that it was the demon holder, the one who held the same fox that destroyed his home and business that day 8 years ago. Now if the man was sober, he'd simply yell at the kid and stalk off before his anger made him do something that was sure to get him arrested or worse. But in his inebriated state, the drunk didn't think about nor care for the consequences for his actions and sent a vicious kick at Naruto's unprotected ribs. The blonde child gave a startled yelp in surprise, pain, and fear. He landed in a nearby puddle with a splash and he looked up at his attacker with wide, scared eyes. While most adults had made it clear they didn't want anything to do with him, and some seemed to downright hate him, no one had ever gone as far as to physically attack him before. Naruto found the experience to be especially terrifying. "Stupid demon brat," the drunk slurred as he stalked towards the blonde and raised his leg for another kick. "The Hokage should have killed you the second you were born." With that, the kick connected with Naruto's chin and he saw stars as a razor-sharp pain made itself known. The whiskered child tasted BLD as his lips split. Whimpering in pain, not even able to cry out due to the pain in his face and bruised ribs, Naruto curled up into a ball in the dirty puddle water to try and make a smaller target of himself. Instead of backing off, the drunk seemed to get angrier at, in his mind, the demon's attempt at playing innocent and proceeded to ruthlessly kick the child in any place he could reach. Naruto gasped in pain and fear as the assault continued, screwing his eyes shut in a feeble attempt to block out the pain. This went on for what felt like hours for Naruto but in reality was only a minute or two. Then the pain stopped and, risking a glance, noticed that the scary man was gone now. What Naruto didn't know was that his Ambu guard had finished their shift switch and, when they saw what was going on, quickly apprehended the man who got a one-way ticket to the torture and interrogation department. Doing a quick check over the boy to see that no serious damage was done to the boy while he was cowering, the one Ambu who stayed to guard the Jinchuriki quickly hid himself into the shadows. While they would have preferred to go and comfort the boy, it was necessary for his protection that it not be known he had a security detail. Holding back tears, Naruto got up in a sitting position and held his knees to his chest. He just couldn't understand it. Why did everyone seem to hate him so much? While tonight was one of the most extreme examples, Naruto could tell by the looks in their eyes that other people wished to do something similar to him. Hearing a crash, Naruto looked up startled, thinking that the drunk had come back. Instead he saw a small cat, probably only half a year old, slinking out of the garbage cans that lined the alley's walls. The cat seemed to sniff around for a bit before setting its lamp-like blue eyes on Naruto. Cautiously, the cat sneaked over to the hurt boy and, after sniffing him for a minute, started to rub its head affectionately against one of his hands. Giving a weak smile, Naruto took the invitation and started stroking the cat along the back. Looks like we're both on our own, huh fella?" Naruto asked as he started to scratch the cat behind the ear, getting it to purr contently. "You're pretty easy to please, aren't ya? Just a few affectionate words and a scratch behind the ears and you're all set to go. You know, sometimes I envy you animals. I mean, no matter how nasty people get to you, you always seem to bounce right back as happy as ever. Plus, most people seem to like animals no matter what. I wish I was born an animal sometimes," Naruto stated with conviction. What Naruto didn't know was that his body was going through an interesting transition at that point. You see, thanks to the mixing of both his parents' genes caused the formation of a never-before-seen dormant BLD line to form in the boy. For the rest of his life, he could have had this BLD line and never be aware of it, eventually having it die out over time. However, thanks to several factors, this BLD line was about to awaken. You see, one of the factors was having access to his chakra, which he could now do thanks to the academy. The second factor was the Kyubai's chakra that was mixing in with his regular chakra to help fix the injuries Naruto got from the attack, which acted as a defibrillator of sorts for the BLD line, allowing it to be momentarily active unless acted upon. The last factor was will and desire. At this exact moment, Naruto's desire coupled with his strong enough will allowed the BLD line to take corporal form. The desire was to be like animals. There was a bright flash of light and the remaining Ambu who was watching the scene had to momentarily cover his eyes. When he could open them again, he could only gape at what he saw. There, standing where the blonde boy and the cat once were, was now a giant 40 feet tall beast. The creature itself looked like a cross between a cat and a human, as it stood on its hind legs and had a human-shaped torso and arms, but the rest was distinctly animalistic. The legs were double-jointed while the hands and feet were tipped with knife-like claws. A long whipping tail sprouted from his spine and its head was distinctly cat-like while the entire body was covered in tan fur. The beast, instead of attacking or doing anything that one would expect from a creature of that size and appearance to do, instead let out a confused whimpering sound as it looked around. When the creature looked down, its eyes widened in shock and it let out a large meow-like yelp as it stumbled back on unfamiliar legs and fell on its backside. The cat creature looked at its clawed paws in a panic as it made several sounds that almost sounded like hysterical babbling. By that point, other members of the Ambu arrived as well and, after quickly getting over their initial shock at seeing the strange beast, moved into either capture or kill the potential threat. The first Ambu on the scene, however, quickly intercepted the other Black Ops agents and ordered, "Stop. Do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. Form a perimeter around the area while someone get me Lord Hokage." Now, even though the platoon looked hesitant, they did as their higher-ranking officer asked. Turning back to the still-sitting beast, the original Ambu member removed his mask to show another masked face, one with gravity-defying silver hair. "Naruto?" the man whispered. The creature turned to face the man, its sharp sense of hearing catching the man's words. Hesitantly, the creature seemed to nod, causing the man's one visible eye to widen. Hesitantly, the man went over to the now-revealed transformed boy and noticed that the tip of his head didn't even reach the being's navel while he was sitting down. Awkwardly, the Ambu member reached up and started patting the cat boy's knee, the highest point he could really reach at that point, and said in a calm voice, "Don't worry, Naruto, everything will be okay, I swear. We'll find out what happened and how to fix it, alright." Just then, there was a rustling of leaves and the two turned to see the third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, standing in the area flanked by two Ambu guards. The old man's eyes were wide and alert, but he kept a calm presence as he saw one of his most trusted Ambu near the odd and threatening-looking creature without fear. The other two Ambu meanwhile were tense and ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. "Kakashi, explain to me what is going on. Where did this creature come from, and why isn't any of your squad with Naruto right now?" the third questioned. The now-named Kakashi hesitated, uncertain of how to explain. Finally he said, "Well sir, the thing is." Before he could figure out what to say, there was another big flash of light behind the man. Once it was over, all present gasped quietly at what they saw. Sitting right where the creature was just a second ago was a confused Naruto Uzumaki with a stray tan cat on his lap. The cat sped off while the boy looked around confused for a second before the exhaustion of the day's ordeals caught up with him and sent him into a state of unconsciousness. Scene break. Sarutobi stood outside of a hospital room door with a gloomy expression on his face. Yesterday evening's events played through his mind as he tried to piece together what happened. When he asked the boys' ambu guards what all happened the previous night, they explained that they were currently switching shifts for the night and that had created a blind spot for a few minutes, so they were unable to see or prevent what happened when a drunk attacked Naruto. That was a serious mistake that Hiruzen planned on correcting, but first he had to deal with more pressing matters such as finding out exactly what happened, as Kakashi was confused as well on what happened afterwards. One moment there was a boy, the next there was some sort of cat-like monster that after a few minutes became a boy again. The third was brought out of his musings as a med-nin came up to him. The medic gave the aged leader their report on their one patient who had still not fully regained conscious. The boy was found to have bruising on his ribs and had a nasty cut on his chin, but both healed within the hour. The two looked at each other, both having an inkling as to what caused Naruto's miraculous recovery. The medic continued, no other significant injuries were found. However, BLD tests on the boy have indicated, at this the medic paused, which worried the Hokage. Indicated what? Hiruzen asked in all seriousness. The medic took a deep breath and looked the professor straight in the eye. The BLD tests show the unleashing of a previously recessive BLD line awakening, most likely brought on by the stress of whatever happened before the events of last night. But that's not all, Lord Hokage, the medic said, catching the Hokage's attention since he was caught off guard from the news. As far as he knew, neither of Naruto's parents had BLD lines. However, it wasn't unheard of for them to skip several generations and be unlocked under extreme situations. It wasn't, however, a BLD line he'd ever heard of, and in all his years as Hokage he'd seen close to all known ones. The med-nin continued in a serious tone, "We've compared the data of the BLD line to all known to us and have found no match. Neither has there been anyone like this in recorded history. The only hypothesis we can gather is that the boy has unlocked a new BLD line." If Hiruzen was stunned before, he was shocked speechless now. He'd never actually bared witness to the birthing of a new BLD line before. Of course, this sort of thing had to happen from time to time in order for BLD lines to be made, but there hasn't been a new BLD line found in several decades. And, judging from what he saw, the BLD line young Naruto had was impressive if the muscles, size, teeth, and claws weren't just for show. The question was, what did the BLD line actually do? That is what the elderly Hokage next asked the medic. The man went through his charts before explaining, "Well, Lord Hokage, from what we've been able to study from samples taken from Mr. Uzumaki, along with eyewitness reports, we've determined that this BLD line takes the user's body and binds it with another creature's body at the molecular level. Once the DNA is bound, the two bodies take on a form that can most suit the two, which explains the sharp increase in both mass and height. From the MRI we took of the boy, it also seems to take a toll on the user's mind, most likely a side effect of two minds sharing one body, but the damage seems minor and would likely to become even more minimal over time. Also, the strain on the user's chakra seems great as Mr. Uzumaki was nearly completely depleted of chakra. But we're speculating it could be due to this being his first time using the ability, plus the fact that the separation between him and the cat seemed forced. Honestly though, Lord Hokage, most of this is just hypothesis since we have no samples from when he was actually using the BLD line." Hiruzen nodded along to this, still trying to process everything that he'd learned. Everything kept going through his mind as he made his way back to his office. Being able to merge with the DNA of an animal. That sounded like an even more advanced version of the Yamanaka's strongest mind transference jutsu. It would be a remarkable asset to have on the field if one was able to master it. The side effects were worrying though. Hopefully with some time and more tests, they'd be able to find out more about what the BLD line was capable of and how to avoid anything harmful to the child he saw as a second grandson. But there were other things that needed to be done first. The most important thing to do was to make sure that the events of last night, and by extension Naruto's BLD line, be kept a secret for as long as possible. There was no telling what certain elements, both inside the village and out, would do once they discovered Naruto's BLD line. Both Orochimaru and Danzo came to mind at this. Then there was the fact that the majority of the civilians in Konoha were still uncomfortable around Naruto, which last night's events reinforced that opinion. There's no telling what some fool would do when they found out that Naruto could actually become a monster instead of just the monster that was in their heads. The next thing to do was to comfort Naruto and let him know what happened. Hopefully, the old man could calm the boy and tell him in a way that would not upset him further, but also show him the severity of the situation. That led to the next problem, how to get Naruto to control his new BLD line. Whenever a BLD line is awakened, it's always necessary for the wielder to learn how to use it to avoid hurting themselves and others. It wouldn't work to have Naruto simply ignore the BLD line, because that could lead to severe physical and mental problems such as activating his abilities against his will like last night. What Hiruzen needed was a teacher for Naruto, but who? After carefully considering his options, there were only 2 clans that came to mind with any experience in animal-based jutsu. Fortunately, both clans resided in the Hidden Leaf. Paging his secretary, Hiruzen said, "Please contact Suman Yuzuka and Shibuya Burame. Tell them I'll need their assistance and to be discreet when coming here." With that, the elderly leader sat back in his chair and wondered about what all the future would bring. 1. Think of Naruto's dormant BLD line as a stem cell. It had no real basis to form off of until it latched onto Naruto's subconscious thoughts, then formed to sweet them like how a stem cell will form to match its preferred surroundings. 2. I know you were all probably hoping for a big monster rampage scene, but I went with this for several reasons. 1 is that I wanted to keep this a short challenge chapter, and writing out an elaborate fight scene doesn't fall under that category. 2 is that, while being both young and confused, Naruto was still trying to cope with what was happening around him. Finally, because he's so young I can't imagine him being able to hold up an ability like that for too long, even with his enormous chakra reserves, do you? That will come later with practice. 3. I can't imagine new BLD lines popping up out of nowhere is very common, otherwise Orochimaru would have had many more BLD line users under his employ than he did in canon. Naruto of the Black BLD. A 5-year-old Naruto Uzumaki got up with a groan from the snow he lay in. He had just went to rescue that cute pale-eyed girl from that group of bullies. However, instead of pulling off a big dramatic rescue that made him look super cool and epic for all to see, the blonde whiskered child had gotten on the wrong end of a beatdown when his attempts at performing the clone jutsu bombed spectacularly. Now it was getting near dark, his scarf was laying in tatters around him, his head throbbed from the multiple kicks and punches it received, and his black BLD was dripping out his nose from a particularly hard punch to the face. Oh, did I forget to mention that Naruto's BLD is black? It was the day after Naruto was born that the 3rd Hokage had made the discovery when he took Naruto to be examined by the medic nin to make sure he was born healthy. When the doctors had went to take a BLD sample, they were shocked to find that, after needing to use more force than normal to break the infant's skin with the needle, that the boy's BLD was black in color. This was the result of a very rare BLD line that only appears every so often. Unlike other BLD lines, it is not passed from parent to child, but instead is caused by a rare mutation in the host genes. Only a handful of people have been recorded to have this trait, the most famous example being the 3rd Hokage. What this BLD line does, besides giving the BLD its odd pigmentation, is increase a human being's durability nearly 100-fold. It makes it nearly impossible for the user to be deeply cut by a blade, and while physical blows can hurt, the damage done is not nearly as severe as it can be to a normal person. It was part of what made the 3rd Hokage such an indestructible tank on the battlefield. The other reason is that he trained his body to the peak of physical fitness to increase his already durable body to the level where he could fight the 8 Tails to a standstill. Naruto, when he was old enough to understand this, was predictably excited about this, thinking his already super awesomeness was bound to increase dramatically thanks to having his super rare BLD line. Though a part of him did wonder if it was because of his different BLD was why people seemed so cold towards him, the 3rd assured the boy that this wasn't the case. So for now, Naruto accepted that he was special in his own way and that it would help him further his dream to becoming Hokage. Little did he know how right he was. Something unique was happening inside the boy as he sat there in the snow, something that had been set in motion the moment the 9-tailed fox was sealed in him as a baby. The black BLD, being so rare, had never been present in someone who had a tailed beast sealed within them. The results, if observed, were quite shocking. The corrosive chakra mixed with the black BLD, fusing with it, and actually causing a spark of life to form within the black fluid. Over the years, this life continued to grow and mature within the unknowing boy. The being that formed began to learn of the world around it as it pulsed through Naruto's veins, learning of words, people, places, things, and ideas. This new life had been waiting, watching, for the moment it gained the strength to become fully self-aware. That moment was now. That was pathetic. An echoey voice seemed to say to Naruto, though the clearing was empty save for himself. Naruto jumped and looked around, trying to see where the voice came from. Who said that? He stuttered. Me, you idiot, who else? Are you seriously that dumb or are you just trying to play on the blonde stereotype? The voice said tauntingly. Naruto growled at that, shock momentarily forgotten. If there was one thing he couldn't stand, it was being made fun of. Listen you jerk, knock it off and come out where I can see you or I'm gonna kick your ass. The Jinchuriki shouted out. Oh, so scary blondie. Aw, what the heck, it's no fun ruffling your feathers if you can't see me. Hold on a sec. The voice then paused before Naruto felt an odd sensation on his back. It almost felt like when he put his hand on the tube of a vacuum, a weird, seeking feeling. It wasn't really painful, but it was definitely odd. What Naruto didn't see was that out of his back, his black BLD was seeping out of his pores like sweat but in much greater quantities. The BLD then began to flow and twist, taking on a shape as it partially lifted itself from his back. The liquid took on a solid-like quality, becoming a completely new shape as the being that was given life through tailed beast chakra and black BLD was formed. The being's body was small but muscular, with round gloved hands and spikes on several parts of his body, but no legs as its lower body was protruding from Naruto's back. His face consists of a large egg shape, with no visible mouth and a giant white X on his face where his nose should be, with large ping-pong ball-like eyes with X's for pupils. The being leaned over Naruto's head until its face was hanging upside down mere inches from the boy's nose. A large, toothy smile formed on the seemingly blank face, and the voice from before said, "Sup." Somewhere in the hidden rain village, a figure with ring-patterned purple eyes raised his head at the piercing scream that tore across the area. He mused, someone has learnt the true meaning of pain. He then went back to look over the details of the decade-long plan in the making. Back with Naruto. Naruto desperately tried to back away from the black blob person thing. However, this was made pointless due to the fact it was coming right out of his back. Who what how? Naruto babbled incomprehensibly for a moment before the BLD creature brought a fist sharply down on his skull, causing him to yelp in pain. Small or no, the thing had a punch like iron. Calm down, Blondie. Geez, if I had ears I think I'd be deaf after that. Anyway, nice to finally meet ya. Name's Ragnarok, the now identified Ragnarok said. Our Ragnarok? Naruto questioned numbly, still trying to comprehend the creature coming out of his back. It was then he remembered where he heard that word before. A few weeks ago, a traveling storyteller had come to the Leaf Village and was telling his tales in the village center. Naruto, like most children, got interested in hearing tales of lands far away. One of the stories the man spoke of was a people far to the west who believed a great battle would occur at the end of time, a time they called Ragnarok. Yep, liked the sound of it when that guy was talking about all that end of the world crap, so I figured I'd name myself that. Got a problem with that? Ragnarok questioned while his eyes seemed to narrow at the wielder of the black BLD. Naruto quickly shook his head in the negative, not wanting to upset this strange creature. And no, it's a very cool name. He then took a breath to calm his nerves, scrutinizing Ragnarok carefully. Anyway, he started slowly, what are you anyway? Ragnarok's bulb-like eyes seemed to crinkle in a grin as he replied, well, I'm made from your BLD, duh. My BLD? Naruto asked with a huge question mark over his head as he continued, how's that work out? The old man never mentioned anything like this when he told me why my BLD is different. And how are you able to talk and think and stuff? Aren't you supposed to be in my body if you're really my BLD? Ragnarok shrugged his shoulders in a nonchalant manner. How the crap am I supposed to know that, dumbass? I just really woke up a couple days ago and could actually form outside your body today. Basically, I know everything you know. I'm just better at it than you are, he finished smugly. A tick mark appeared on Naruto's head. Hey, watch it. I'm gonna be the future Hokage, you know. So show a little respect. Besides, you're living in my body, right? So doesn't that mean I'm your landlord or something? He asked hotly. Ragnarok rolled his eyes before bonking the blonde on the head again. Wrong, whisker face. If anything, you owe me for keeping your sorry hide alive. As for the whole being Hokage thing, how are you gonna pull that off when you get the snot kicked out of you by a bunch of toddlers? He chided. Naruto rubbed his abused skull while grumbling for a moment before glaring back at the black BLD being. Shut up. I'm gonna get better, believe it. Then I'm going to be the best Hokage the village has ever had. The two stared at each other for what felt like an eternity before Ragnarok started chuckling, which soon developed into full-blown laughter. Naruto angrily demanded to know what was so funny, but was ignored until the living BLD finally quieted down, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye before turning back to the boy with a big grin developing on his face. Yeah, I like that attitude, kid. Let's see how far that determination will take you. I'll even lend you my strength just to see if you can prove me wrong. Naruto looked to him in confusion. Huh, what can you do? And why would you want to help me anyway? I thought you figured I was pathetic. Oh, trust me, you are pathetic, Ragnarok said while waving a hand dismissively, continuing despite the new glare he was receiving. But it would be pretty boring just lazing around in your sorry self while watching you get kicked around like earlier, so I'll help you out for the entertainment value. Plus, if you're holding me then you're representing me, and I don't feel like having a PP for a wielder. As for what I can do, didn't I just say I was made of your BLD? Give your finger a small cut and you'll see what I mean. Cautiously, Naruto brought a finger to his finger and gave it a nip with his canines. Looking at the now slowly bleeding finger, Naruto wondered what was supposed to happen now. BLDY needle, Ragnarok called from Naruto's back, and suddenly with an odd feeling running all the way through his body, the BLD seemed to burst out of the pinprick on his finger before solidifying, becoming a long sharp needle poking out of Naruto's finger. Whoa, Naruto cried out in shock while falling over again, watching in awe at the clearly deadly weapon forming from his very life fluids before it dissolved once again into liquid form, splattering into the snow on the ground. With wide eyes, Naruto looked back to Ragnarok in hopes for an explanation. Ragnarok seemed to smirk before elaborating, told you, I'm made up of your BLD so I can control it as I, and now you, wish. Plus, since black BLD is stronger than normal BLD, it can form weapons way easier. Trust me kid, with me around you can become one of the most badass ninja on the planet. So what do you say, partner? He finished while holding out a hand expectantly. Naruto quickly weighed his options. On the one hand, Ragnarok came across as rude, sarcastic, violent, and more than a bit creepy. On the other hand, Ragnarok was staying with him no matter what thanks to him literally being a part of the boy. The skills he could gain from Ragnarok had endless possibilities. He was right in that the blonde was currently lacking in the skill department, and maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't be so lonely all the time anymore. Throwing caution to the wind, Naruto reached out and bumped fists with Ragnarok. Deal, partner, Naruto replied with a big grin forming on his whiskered face. 1. This scene is from the movie Naruto, The Last. 2. I'm not overly familiar with Norse mythology, so sue me if my details are off. Also, I figured a storyteller from a land far to the west would be the best method of finding a name for Ragnarok instead of him just pulling it out of his ass. Jurassic Naruto. Orochimaru's Journal, Entry 5. I have discovered something fascinating while going undercover in the land of Earth for Danzo. Apparently, one of the areas where the Third Shinobi War took place had a powerful earth jutsu break out a large portion of the bedrock, and inside of it revealed the fossilized remains of some sort of large animal. Curious, I decided to study the remains, and I was surprised to find the creature dates back to 10 million years ago, long before any recorded records of chakra or even humans themselves existing. Genetically, they bear resemblance to birds and most forms of reptiles, yet they can come into sizes that can rival those of most boss summons. They species seem to be largely focused into two groups, herbivores and carnivores, with each having their own strengths and weaknesses. The more I study these remains, the more potential I see from these creatures. Most of these animals could quite possibly match an entire army of trained ninja and come out the victor, and they don't even possess the ability to use chakra. Just think, if someone was to harness both this power and chakra, they'd have the ability to become the strongest being of all. Further research is required. Orochimaru's Journal, Entry 12. Damn it. While I have been able to synthesize the DNA from the creatures I have found, they're even more resistant to binding to human DNA than Hashirama's DNA. Every time I try to bind the DNA with a test subject, their bodies can't handle the strain and go through a molecular rejection. The effects are quite gruesome. I need to find someone with a strong enough vitality that there will be a greater chance at survival than the normal insects I deal with. This may be my greatest scientific challenge to date. Orochimaru's Journal, Entry 14. After 3 months of searching, I believe I have found the perfect test subject to test the fossilized DNA on. The answer was so obvious I'm surprised I didn't think of it sooner, the current Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Not only will being the container for the fox make the boy have a high amount of durability, but thanks to him also being of Uzumaki descent, his life force should increase his survival rate exponentially. The best part is, his body is still young at only 3 years of age, and that will make his body much more accepting of any changes made. Sadly, due to the boy's Jinchuriki status, it will make him unavailable for my other pursuits. No matter, because if the process succeeds I will be able to use his modified DNA as a base to make a more survivable bond for other more suitable test subjects. The only downside to this is that the boy is under constant guard thanks to my bleeding heart sensei. I will have to be patient and wait for the opportune moment to strike. With luck, no one will connect me to his disappearance. Orochimaru's Journal, Entry 20. Success. After 2 months of constant observation, I was able to have the Kyuubi brat brought to one of my hidden labs. It was a time-consuming task, finding the perfect gap in his security to exploit, but it should be worth it in the end. I was able to place a convincing replica of the boy's body in a river. With luck, it'll be believed he accidentally drowned and I won't be interrupted by nosy investigations. Now, to begin the experiment. Orochimaru's Journal, Entry 21. Signs look promising. Patient 9 has yet to show any negative signs after the DNA combination. Most others showed degeneration within 24 hours, and it has been 3 days already. No physical changes yet, but those should show with time. The funeral for the brat was held yesterday, not many people attended. I'm fairly certain many of the villagers were celebrating that their demon is dead. It is good to get a test subject no one will miss, Kyukuku. Orochimaru's Journal, Entry 25. Patient 9 has fully integrated the DNA. After carefully studying samples taken from his BLD, I've discovered that the DNA has bonded to his own in ways that even I was unable to predict. It would seem that the boy's body, in an attempt to save itself, took the foreign DNA and turned it into a BLD line of sorts. Completely and utterly fascinating. I wonder, will it be a trait that can be inherited if the subject was to have children? And what would happen if the subject were to use both the BLD line and his Biju's chakra together? Only time will tell, I assume. For now, it would appear that the BLD line lies in a dormant state. It should fully awaken by the time the boy reaches puberty, but there should be some signs before then. Already I've noticed a change to the boy's physique. His muscle structure is more defined for someone his age. His skin has taken on a more durable texture, and both his reflexes and senses are sharpening at an astonishing rate. Yet at the same time, the changes are nearly invisible unless one knew what to look for. It excites me to think of what the BLD line's full capabilities will hold. Orochimaru's Journal, Entry 40. All good things must come to an end, sadly. Sarutobi Sensei has caught wind of my labs and will be raiding the ones he can find in the leaf before too long. Most of my research will have to be copied and then destroyed, and then I will be marked as a missing nin. Unfortunately, the majority of my projects in Konoha will have to be left behind. No matter, as the subjects for the wood release project are all deceased and I have been able to figure out the necessary process for my immortality jutsu. The only thing I will regret leaving behind is Patient 9. I was looking forward to seeing how his progress over the years will be, though perhaps this will be for the best. After all, being in a less controlled environment shall possibly produce more interesting results than in one of my labs. Perhaps I will come by to check in on him when he reaches puberty and the BLD line should be fully active and I can see the full results. Perhaps I'll even be able to obtain better BLD samples than what I have so far. The only real regret I'll have is that I probably won't get to see Sarutobi-sensei's face when he sees what I've done with the boy, Kukuku. Orochimaru's hidden lab, Leaf Village. Several of the Anbu Black Ops, led by the third Hokage Hiruzen Sarutobi, proceeded further and further into the House of Horrors the man's former student called a laboratory. It had been nearly 12 hours since the first lab was discovered. 12 hours since he found out just how much of a monster his former pupil has become. 12 hours since the third had let the man escape with his life. With each new nightmare discovered in the lab, Hiruzen was regretting that decision more and more. Countless bodies of men, women, and children have been found. Some from foreign nations, some from the Leaf Village itself. It made the elderly man wonder where he went wrong with Orochimaru. Sarutobi shook his head. No, there was no time to ponder what-ifs, for now he needed to find and, if possible, correct as many of the Snake Summoner's mistakes as possible. They'd already found one survivor, a young boy who, according to the charts in the room, was implanted with the first Hokage cells. Suddenly, one of the Anbu with a rabbit mask called out, "Lord Hokage, you better come see this." Bracing himself for whatever sin against nature he was about to see, Hiruzen stepped into the room Rabbit was gesturing to. Inside the room there was standard medical and lab equipment set up, but in the center of the room there was a large glass tank filled with a greenish fluid. Inside the fluid there was an outline of a human body, though the figure was small so it could have either been a child or an extremely short adult. According to the heart rate monitor attached to the tube, the occupant was currently alive somehow. Getting closer, Sarutobi noticed a medical chart hanging below the tube. Taking it, he read over its contents. While most of the writing was blacked out, at the top of the page it read in bold print Patient 9. Turning back to the tube, the old man squinted his eyes to get a better look at the occupant. Despite the green coloration of the water and the distorting effects of the glass, there was no mistaking that spiky hair and the whisker-shaped birthmarks. Eyes widening, Hiruzen gave a shout of Naruto. And, like a baseball player, swung his mighty staff to shatter the glass, dumping the fluid and the tube's occupant to the ground. With reflexes beyond a person his age, the third swooped down and caught the boy before his body could hit the floor. Placing an ear to the boy's chest, Hiruzen let out a sigh of relief as he heard the boy's strong heartbeat. Turning to the Anbu, Boar, beside him, he handed the half-naked boy over to the man and ordered, "I want him taken to the hospital ASAP. No one is to know of Naruto's situation until I say so. Are we clear? The rest of you," he announced while turning to the remaining Anbu, "I want you to spread out and find anything useful in this room. We need to know exactly what went down in this room." And so it went on like this for hours, the Anbu collecting any scrap of documentation and evidence they could find in the Nightmare Lab. The next day, Naruto awoke in the hospital much to Hiruzen's delight and went to see him personally. When asked what he remembered, Naruto's mind seemed to blank out the moment of his capture. So either his mind was altered or he was suppressing the memories of what happened to him. Either way, it was probably for the best, the doctors told him, as the shock of everything that happened to him would probably break the mind of a seasoned ninja. Accepting this, Hiruzen asked what was done to the boy. The doctors showed their results saying that while no noticeable change has occurred, the boy's DNA seems to have been slightly altered in some way. It didn't seem harmful, so the doctors dismissed the boy nearly a week later with orders to come back fairly regularly to see if there were any changes to his condition. The villagers' reaction to the boy's survival was mixed, some wanting to see him stay dead while others actually missed the little ball of sunshine. Time passed, and while Naruto wasn't treated much better by the villagers, there was something different about the boy that those with an eye for detail were able to notice. For starters, for a toddler his muscles were becoming surprisingly well developed. Not so much bodybuilder level, but he could probably give Mike Guy a run for his money in a few years' time despite the fact that he didn't work out any more than a usually child plays around. Another change was his diet. While he still enjoyed ramen, Naruto had seemed to develop a bigger appetite for meals containing more meats and vegetables. His senses also seemed to have increased, causing him to see, hear, and smell almost as well as a young Inuzuka. Finally, his body became much more durable. One winter day, when defending a pale-eyed girl from a group of older kids, the boy took quite the beating, but he had minimal damage during the entire thing and was eventually able to beat the older kids through sheer attrition. While there was some concern over this, especially from some village idiots that thought the demon brat was showing his true colors, it didn't gain too much attention. The third, however, couldn't help but notice and worry, wondering just what his former student did to the boy during those months he was presumed dead. What no one, not even Hiruzen Sarutobi, knew was that Naruto had noticed changes in his body that come and go over time. Sometimes it was small things, like his skin becoming so rough it was almost scaly, or his nails would grow and sharp and long overnight. Other times the changes were more severe, like his teeth would suddenly become razor sharp in his mouth, or his eyes would become a reptilian yellow color. One time, Naruto even felt his spine lengthening into a tail of all things. Fortunately, Naruto found he could for the most part suppress these changes when they occur, and when he could not, he was very skilled at covering it up. While he didn't like keeping something like this hidden, and he hated lying to the old man when he asked if anything was wrong, Naruto feared that these changes were linked to why so many people seemed to look at him with such disdain. Better to hide the problem than to face even more scrutiny, the boy figured with his logic. Besides this, life went on, and the time Naruto spent as a lab rat faded a bit from memory. Wave Country, Battle of the Bridge. Naruto's shoulders shook as he held Sasuke's still body in his arms, his rival seemingly taking a fatal blow meant for him with multiple needles sticking out of his body. Their assailant, a masked boy who didn't seem to be much older than the 12-year-old genin he was fighting, spoke in a soft voice as he melded his body with the ice mirror behind him. "Is this the first time you've seen a comrade die? This is part of what it means to be a ninja." "Shut up," Naruto spoke in a quiet voice, his face hidden by his blonde hair. Laying Sasuke down on the ground, Naruto slowly stood back up as he continued talking. "I hated you too, Sasuke ... and yet." As he spoke, chakra started to whip around him, sending up a miniature tornado. "You'll pay for this," Naruto continued, his voice taking on a growl-like quality to it. The masked ninja watched in interest and a hint of fear as the boy's chakra seemed to explode outwards. Lifting his face up, the fake hunter nin was shocked to see the boy's face no longer looked fully human. His skin had taken on a scale-like texture, making him almost look lizard-like in appearance. The skin was also darkening in color, becoming a grayish-blue color, and the needles popped out of the hardening flesh. Naruto's hands cracked before the fingers started to shift and move, causing his hands to have only 3 fingers with 2-inch-long obsidian-colored talons on them. His pants burst apart as a long reptilian tail burst from his tailbone, whipping behind him in agitation. His feet seemed to bulge, then ripped his shoes apart as they also became taloned, with the ones facing inwards to be longer and curving in an upward position. The legs were next as they bent and became double-jointed. The blonde's body started to lengthen slightly, becoming more streamlined for greater speeds. Finally, Naruto's face changed. His teeth became as sharp as needles. His eyes turned yellow and reptilian. His hair seemed to thin until it became almost feather-like on the back of his head. And finally, with one last crack, Naruto's face pushed forward, forming a reptile's muzzle. Staring in amazement, the masked ninja could only stare in shock as the transformed boy leaned back his head and gave a shrill roaring noise. Looking back to where the masked boy hovered in his mirror with the eyes of a predator, Naruto growled out in a warped voice, "I'm gonna kill you." With that, the velociraptor ninja screeched and ran forward, teeth and claws bared. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.